Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be here to share my passion for using behavioral science and gamification to increase the adoption, the traction, and the engagement of our sustainability programs. We're all here because we want to change the world. You've probably been involved in all kinds of sustainability initiatives, from protests to apps, writing books, documentaries, blogs, studies, all sorts of initiatives. But we have to ask the question, which is, are we actually doing anything? And by that, I mean, are we making change that is measurable? And there's this tricky problem that happens with sustainability, which is that even if we know about an environmental cause and we are genuinely concerned about climate change, about the whales, about the polar bears, that doesn't necessarily translate into action. And this is called the value action gap, and it's also known as the information deficit hypothesis. And what we need to do is understand how to tap into the motivational core of the human mind. And there are other ways to get in. We can think of them like doors, for example, that will get us there. They can be trust, goals, group identity, social position, or social imitation, to just start with a few broad categories. And traditionally, sustainability has not been using this type of behavioral science. Now, this is my passion. I started as an environmental engineer. Now I do design, and I wrote this book called How to Save the World. And I also have a podcast where we take a deep dive into the academic literature about what really does drive environmental behavioral change. And what I do is something that I call Fitbit for the Planet design. It means looking at the data, getting the data to show on a type of interface the same way that a Fitbit would show you your fitness data, and then using reward systems and this type of gamification design to encourage more of the behavior. And it all comes down to primarily getting the data and showing it, the environmental and climate data, in a feedback loop, which traditionally us as sustainability professionals, we haven't done nearly as well as other industries like Silicon Valley or health or pretty much any other type of high-tech industry. And I used this quote from the Bill Gates 2013 annual letter, where he says, you can achieve amazing progress if you set a clear goal and find a measure that will drive progress towards that goal. This may seem pretty basic, but it is amazing to me how often it is not done and how hard it is to get right. And we can get a whole lot better at it. Here are a few examples of how we can use better data to drive behavior change. Using colored lights that show energy efficiency. There are satellites that photograph the entire Earth every single day. Bicycle counters that show us how many people are riding bikes. LiDAR to show us the three-dimensional shape of cities. A necklace that will sense the air pollution as you are wearing it in real time walking around. Scales on garbage trucks that can measure the load of a garbage truck, and thermal imagery showing us urban heat island effects. And there are sensors everywhere that we can program and we can use to better manage the Earth, like a Fitbit for the planet. This brings us to the question of, if we show people the data, does it really work to drive change? And the biggest example that is used in this space is called the EPA Toxic Release Inventory. This was an initiative by the American EPA in the late 90s, where they asked corporations in America to disclose to them how much toxic chemicals they were using. And it had a profound effect. In a few short years, toxic chemical use in the United States had gone down by 45%. And it was believed to have happened purely from the task of getting people to look at the numbers and then disclosing them, not even publicly, just to the EPA as an accounting measure. One of the best examples of the real-time environmental feedback data loop is of the dashboard of the Toyota Prius. You can literally see your carbon emissions when you are in the driver's seat, happening in real time. We need to use this type of model for all of the type of environmental behaviors that we are trying to manifest. We see them all the time in speeding in school zones. Once we put a feedback loop of the velocity of a car, speeding goes down by 14%. And it can also be low tech. We don't need to always use high-tech sensors and dashboards. Merely putting a sign up in a college campus that showed the amount of recycling that was going into a bin made the amount of recycled material in that bin of paper go up by 77%. we can use feedback loops in what is called ambient messaging. That means not on a smartphone, not on a browser, but it is in the ambient environment on the wall, signaling to people our carbon emissions that unconsciously triggers them to start saving electricity. Something like this, where screens are used to signal our emissions on dashboards on buildings. And what's profound about the concept of ambient messaging, ambient or persuasive technology can persuade users without using the user's conscious attention. And it can reduce kilowatt hours by anywhere between 12 and 56%, depending on what study you are looking at, frequently when people don't even know that they are doing it. And here are some designs, concept designs that I've done up looking at how we can display data, environmental data and climate data in this type of way. So for example, could we have billboards that show the amount of petrol that our city is using in real time and adding gamification design to it so we can collectively get our whole cities interested in trying to get this number down? Can we do it with air pollution? A sensor at that particular point in time, signaling with a display screen that shows us the air pollution at that time and place. Can we do it with the carbon emissions that are in electricity? Large billboard digital screens showing us the carbon emissions and how much they change through the day, from lunchtime to dinner time to the evening. This is a Chrome extension we developed that shows the real-time carbon emissions of the California electricity grid, showing how they bump up at breakfast time. We have a lot of solar here in California. Then they go down during the daytime. Then they go up into a really sharp peak during the evening. And then in a heat wave, they go through the roof because everybody has their air conditioners on. They use an enormous amount of kilowatts, and we need every single one of the 74 gas peaker plants functioning at full capacity to power all of these air conditioners. And few people understand this data. So my mission with this work is to try and figure out how we can do better public disclosure of data so we can have a result that's similar to what we saw with the EPA's toxic release inventory, but to do with the carbon that is embodied in the kilowatt hours of the electricity we use. It could even be an art project like this, signaling color to everybody in the city. This is a screen we've been developed that can show it with LEDs in real time in color. We have to ask the question, can we get the data with geographic granularity? Do we have the data only for an entire country? Or do we have it for a council or for a district or a neighborhood or a suburb? We need to get this geographic granularity of data so that people in the community can have agency over that number. And can we get it in real time? That's when we can really develop apps and tools and interfaces that have the power to influence people. And this is what I call the Fitbit for the planet. We have the data everywhere, signaling to everybody all the time what they need to know and encourage them to improve those numbers. So once we have the data, then we can then look into the gamification design. And it's what I call bringing measurement to the center of the creative process. We really need to think about how to make it fun. So the first thing that may sound incredibly obvious, which is how to get from here to there. Have we really worked out the numbers of where we are and where we want to go? I wouldn't need to bring it up if it rarely was done really well. And so what we're talking about is having a master progress bar for our climate and sustainability initiatives, where we have a start, we have an end, and we are tracking progress in between and giving reward systems, love hearts, smiley faces, earth emojis for encouraging people to make progress. And one way this can be done on an app that I developed for zero waste was taking a slug and dragging it across the dots. Dragging it across the dots, much like Pac-Man, is a way of staggering progress of the initiatives you want people to make. And time again, when I've seen sustainability initiatives, they talk about the problem, and then they have an enormous range of sustainability actions you can take, 100-page PDF of all the green things that you can do, and it just becomes like a glob of actions that people struggle to make it through. And the people designing the sustainability program have not gone through and isolated every single action one by one, like the circles that I've done here, to try and bring people through the progress bar. A simple thing that we can do with behavior design is just a behavior chart. This is called a plastic-free 30-day challenge. Anybody can do it. You can print it off and then give yourself a star as you bring people on this challenge. Another way that we can use the behavior chart is to ask people not just of their own behaviors, but how they influence everybody around them. This is a behavior chart for how many of your friends and family you have got to do certain actions. And this type of social network effect marketing, I really think, is the gold standard of trying to spread sustainable behaviors through society. People are not islands, they are networks, and we need to learn how to design into the human network effect. With gamification design, we often talk about badges and rewards. Now, in this study, a tiny flower was added into Wikipedia editors and a phrase that said thank you, and that got people to spend 20% more time editing Wikipedia pages. A very small interaction for a big result. And this means designing for the reward center of the brain. The brain craves a cookie, it craves a smiley face, it craves a check mark, a compliment that says good job. So we have to always be designing into this reward system to encourage the brain to do more of what we want it to do. Now, moving into interesting ways that we could use augmented reality. We could put air pollution sensors on a city street and get people to wear the goggles to have a look at the air pollution when we're really trying to sell a new policy or air pollution reduction initiative. We could do the same thing with the carbon or the kilowatt hours that are coming out of buildings, adding some gamification design in where we can see these poor performing buildings and possibly target those buildings for decarbonisation or energy efficiency initiatives. We can use augmented reality to see the thermal properties of buildings. It could also be used to imagine a green topia, to imagine a green world, to start encouraging people to think of a beautiful new type of future that we could create. This was a real example that was done in the La Ruhr project in Germany, where they actually did create a biophilic augmented reality experience that people could actually see on the real street. It was embedded into a real mapping project. And people could make their own biophilic ecotopia artwork, so they could see ones that were already made by professionals. And with augmented reality, it doesn't need to be these big fancy projects. There are simple applications that you can use within Instagram using Spark AR to develop these fun type of interactions just for the marketing and the promotion of sustainability initiatives. Now, moving on to maps. This is Google Satellite View. Totally easy to access data in San Francisco, and I'm looking for the houses that have solar panels. It's really easy. You can just look with your own eyes. Bringing this into a gamification design, how do we get most of the houses to adopt solar? And we can see that the solar panels frequently are clustered, indicating that one person got the solar and then talked to all their neighbors about it, and then they got solar too. So how do we make that happen more? Well, we give all of the houses an empty spot. We give a master progress bar tracking where we are, and then we give badges and we track the percentages, and we use a color and we use each block. So we can go to each of these houses and encourage them to essentially fill up the dots a little bit like Pac-Man to hopefully reach our goal and get our progress bar to the end. In this example, it's using 3 big drivers of decarbonisation, which is getting an electric vehicle, getting off natural gas, which is a big push here in California, and also getting solar. So one way this can be done is giving 3 badges for every house, and then going through the houses systematically and giving the houses that have these different things the badge, and then the ones that don't have the badge. And so this will encourage the people to what's called social norming, social imitation, the reward system also wanting to be like their neighbors, and possibly putting households into groups and getting each group to compete. Evidence shows that getting groups of people to compete towards a sustainability goal really does drive people to get together and want to improve their sustainability outcomes. And this comes down to our humans' enormous need for social comparison. We compare each other. When we design sustainability data to get people to compare to each other, it really works. This company called O-Power in California sends these charts out in your electricity bill with a smiley face if you're doing well. And this on average gets a 3% reduction in kilowatt hours, which may sound like a small number in the context of the other data I've been showing, but this is all they do is put this chart in. So to get a 3% reduction across such a large amount of households, we're talking millions of households, is a really big deal for not a lot of effort. This is an example of a project that I did with NASA on urban heat islands, taking these high-resolution photographs of surface temperature during summer in Los Angeles, which has a terrible heat island effect and gets very hot. One neighborhood we can look at is that this is the poor area and this is the rich area. This area has a lot of trees. This area has very few trees. And in this data, we can also see these red spots. This is the power of using granular high resolution data, as we can see this spot. And lo and behold, it is this giant black roof that gets very hot and probably has terrible energy efficiency. And so when we have the data, then we can use examples, social norms that people can imitate, but more importantly, this social comparison. Telling people that they are doing worse than average is enormously powerful to get people to take action. This is really the secret source of change, is reminding the lower performers that they are doing worse than average. It's enormously psychologically powerful. We can also create leaderboards of the hottest properties in an area and also the coolest properties in an area to drive behavior and possibly do some interesting publicity and ultimately drive people and business and property owners to actually take the green actions that we want them to take. We can do the same thing with green cover, biophilic cities, using the band of the electromagnetic spectrum that sees how green something is. Simple percentages, simple star charts, simple UI design, using leaderboards of how green different cities are, and perhaps even looking at the whole Earth. There are multiple organizations right now tracking the entire green cover of the planet. Can we create a master progress bar for the restoration mission of the entire Earth? A wonderfully underutilized nudge technique is using color. Greenpeace used it in this example, where they have the poor performing companies on the red side of the gauge and the better performing companies on the green side of the gauge. It also gets used in the vehicle information labeling with European cars. And unfortunately, in America, we don't use color on the miles per gallon stickers on our cars, so they will not be as effective. Color can also be used digitally in terms of using colored lights or LEDs to signal behavior or to signal energy saving performance. Another way we can use color in combination is with star ratings. This is how the Department of Motor Vehicles shows the vehicle safety ratings in order. They're in a leaderboard, they have a star rating, and they have a color. And this obviously makes people not want to have the poor performing vehicles down the bottom and wants to have a higher performing vehicle. And this design has resulted in a 22% reduction in deaths from car accidents in the last 10 years. In Australia, they use energy star ratings that have resulted in a 25% reduction in water and energy consumption over the last 15 years. In an application that I developed called Energy Lollipop, color is central to the design. The whole background is color that indicates a person's daily carbon emissions. Another really fun way of trying to nudge people's behavior that few people know about is using emotive animals. In a study that I read that used one owl that had a smiling expression, tested against another owl that had a flat expression on students in their learning exercise, found that the ones that had the smiling owl did 23% better on their test than the ones that had the flat owl. And what it says is that a smiling character puts the students in a better mood and then they perform better on the test because they're feeling happier when they're studying. This little robot called the iCat got people to save 47% more energy when it frowned at people for when they were using too much energy. Another example is this one called Flash the Energy Squirrel, and Flash emits love hearts and smiles when the school energy dashboard is doing well in terms of energy, and then he or she or they frowns when the school is using too much energy. And we're hoping to build this into Energy Lollipop, where people get an egg that exists on their browser. And then as they save more energy, the egg then hatches open, and then they get an animal and need to care for their animal by continuing to engage in pro-climate energy saving behaviors. And a couple more techniques of how to drive behavior. How are we going to get people to act? One of the most powerful ways is pledges, asking people for a promise. You can ask people to write down a promise of what they want to do, and they will want to stick to it because trust is very important to us. In this example, a study put a sign on the side of a student shower that said, "Please help save water and turn off the shower while soaping up." And the sign didn't work at all. So they got an actor, and then they got the actor to do the behavior, which is to turn off the water while they're soaping up their body. And 49% of the other young men in the college dorm shower adopted the behavior. They put a second actor in, and the behavior shot up to 67%. And this shows us that people copy each other all the time. We need to use examples, photographs, videos, any way of showing people the sustainable behavior that we want people to do. Anything that we can get people to copy the behavior of other people will work. And the problem is that often in sustainability and in climate change, we have not been doing this. We have been talking about doom and gloom and climate catastrophe, which is not really the best way to go about creating behavior change. So there is a better way of using doom and shame and fear and telling people what not to do. And this is getting people to imagine a better future, thinking of solutions and using examples. This is illustrating the world, what we are for. And there's this beautiful quote that really sums it up well by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry when he says, "If you want to build a ship, do not drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea." So I wanted to ask you, what is the vast and endless sea you would have your people dream of? What is the wonderful new ecotopia future that we are asking people to, the journey we are asking people to come on us with? Maybe it's beautiful biophilic cities covered with green roofs and green walls and trees. Maybe it's futuristic biophilic architecture, like this one by Vincent Calabor that's in the shape of a dragonfly wing. Maybe it's buildings and apartments like this one called the Vertical Forest that is covered in 2,200 trees by architect Stefano Bowery. Or maybe it's just getting kids to grow their own fruit and vegetables at school. And the science shows that the climate doom message isn't the best way to motivate people. This recent neuroscience study shows that when you show people images of climate solutions, people's attention actually draws in and they start focusing more. But when we show images of climate disaster, like smokestacks, melting glaciers, scary weather events, it actually triggers a fight or flight response and people freeze up and they stop absorbing the information that you're trying to present. In another fascinating study, they put a group of people through an environmental imagination exercise where they were asked to imagine a better world, to come up with ideas of how we would reach a greener and cleaner future. And then tested these people afterwards, and it increased their political engagement and also their pro-environmental behavior. And this is why I think we need to launch Earth Imagination Day, to cast a net, to cast an invitation to ask people, what is your I have a dream speech for the planet? How would you imagine the future world? And I believe that these environmental imagination exercises could turn out to be one of the most powerful behavioral drivers that actually get into a deep part of the human psyche to get us to start thinking through all of our behaviors and how we can live greener and how we can positively influence the communities around us. And we tested this out with a school in Melbourne, Australia. I put together a 12-page PDF called the Earth Imagination Toolkit to help educate children about the basic building blocks of what an eco-city would contain. And the children came back with these incredibly inspiring and wonderful eco-city images. They did drawings, paintings, Lego, Minecraft, dioramas, and wrote these gorgeous stories talking about how this ecotopia future would work. It was one of the most beautiful things I've seen. And in 20 years of doing sustainability work, it was so much more creative and impassioned from anything that I've seen in the real sustainability and green building world. I also tried it out with my own group of environmental Imagineers. We get together once a month to create a before and after reimagining artwork of the space near us. We create often simplistic and crude artworks of how we want things to be better. And in only a short time, multiple people in our group went and approached their local cities and their local councils and got involved in local greening and reforestation planning processes. The environmental imagination drove action. In the children's school group, it drove children to influence their parents, and then the parents wrote to the teacher saying how much they'd increased the sustainability actions of their own home. And in the adult group that I was hosting, group members of their own volition went and approached the local cities to start to take real action. Here's my information if you'd like to stay in touch. I'd love to invite you to subscribe to my podcast, How to Save the World, and also have a look at my book, How to Save the World, to take a deeper dive into the evidence-based behavioral science of what really drives sustainable action and behavior.